Well, hello, everybody. A very warm welcome once again to the High Performance Human Podcast. It's your man, Andy, here. And this episode, and I know I have had a propensity to say this before the start of each episode, but I'll be honest, gang, I'm just really bloody lucky that I get to have some of the best humans come and join me on this show. And today is an episode that I've been looking forward to for some time, ever since I met him only a couple of months ago. But the impact that he had on me when I met him and the aura that he's got around him with regards to how he thinks, how he acts, how he behaves, how he communicates, is just at an elite level as far as I'm concerned. Dominic Thurbon is a thought leader. And when we say thought, I think the term thought leader gets bandied around way too much, I think. I really, really do think it does. But if you were to look up the definition of it, I'm pretty sure there'd be a picture of a guy with a mohawk as your definition, because the way that Dom's mind works with respect to how the world operates, how it can improve, how it integrates technology with human thoughts and behaviors, and so many trains of thought that this guy goes down. It's We're going to geek out, and it's going to be amazing. And it's going to be an opportunity for you guys to tune in and plug in and take notes from one of the brightest minds in Australia. And I'm not saying that lightly in any way, shape, or form. Dom, what an absolute honor it is to have you on the show, my man. How the devil are you?
Mate, thank you very much indeed. Those are extraordinarily kind words, which I will fight very hard to live up to over the course of the next hour. Man, I'm super good, super good. I'm about 24, 48 hours off the plane from Europe, so I'm not fully sure what day it is, but I'm very, very well nonetheless.
Yeah, where have you went to Europe? 6 weeks, was it?
Yeah, man, 6 weeks. We Italy, Germany, Austria, uh Romania, Hungary, sneaky little day trip to London for the football, but that's a story for another podcast. Yeah, so just seeing the sights, taking it in, having a bit of time to recharge. Yeah, brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Now, team, when we talk about being success curious, looking at how we can really achieve a high level of performance for ourselves. Dom is very much a guy who has built his entire career, but a lot of his ethos around sustainable growth, sustainable success, but very much paying attention to the construct that you are trying to be successful within. And it's a very, very unique perspective that I don't think we've really scratched the surface of on this podcast at all. So really looking forward to getting stuck into it. Dom, for the people that don't know who you are, who are going to be grateful that they do know who you are after this, give us a bit of an MO as to your journey up to this point and what's got you to this stage in your life where you are very much one of the people that other people listen to.
um Yeah, of course. Well, firstly, nice to meet you, to anyone who's a new listener. The So I'll start with the end, begin with the end in mind, and then take on the journey. So I've spent nearly 20 years now, I think it's 18 and a half ish, helping people and their organizations do behavior change in the face of external disruption. So I think there's a lot of people who talk about disruption. There's a lot of people who talk about change. But my very particular MO that I'm very interested in is the behavior change angle, because in my experience and on the basis of our research, I would say organizations don't change, people do. And when we're talking about these big things, the dawn of AI, sustainability, the intersection of people and technology, disruption, exponentiality, what we're really talking about is at the pointy end of every single one of those, there's a human, you and I, a fragile, imperfect, struggling, doing the best they can human who actually needs to stop doing things this way and start doing things that way if they're going to A, survive, but B, hopefully thrive in those changing times. And so I really like to focus our work and research, and build a few companies doing it, on that question of how do individuals navigate and change behavior in the context of a highly disrupted, very, very rapidly changing world. And so that journey for me started nearly 20 years ago, when I took a job with a guy called Pete Sheehan, who many listeners would know, working in the generational change space. And we started off helping organizations. Back then it was all Gen Y talk. We were helping organizations attract, engage, and retain Gen Y staff. And then that very quickly became a focus on the behavioral angles out of that. And our company became Carrickens Group, which had like 150, 160 people. We had offices in Australia and Canada and the US and New Zealand, and delivering programs all around the world. And we would do everything from a behavior change perspective, from like the big end of town, helping companies design their response to transformational change events, all the way through to doing like, we ran the world's largest schools programs, working with like 700,000 kids a year, doing like financial capability and financial literacy and financial behaviors. So we'd literally work from 5-year-olds to 75-year-olds doing behavior change work. And then we spun off a bunch of companies along the way, and EY acquired us in 2019. And it's been various iterations of that journey along the way.
What made you, like, what was it within you that had you go down this path of really wanting to focus on human behavior and really what made you intrigued around all of this and put your life, but for essentially your life's work into this whole topic of behavior?
Yeah, I think the behavior change thing actually came second. I think the thing that came for, well, actually the zeroth thing that people spend nowhere near enough time talking about and appreciating, and we certainly don't need to spend a lot of time on small progress. But the zero thing was actually luck. I kind of was right place, right time to meet the right person, have the right conversation, get on a particular journey, and kind of everyone's stories really start with that sort of thing. But
Oh, 100%.
yeah. But the first kind of material thing, I think, was a deep sense of dissatisfaction with the way we were dealing with wicked problems, you know? So like at a business level, at a societal level, at an individual level, take something like technological disruption.
Yep.
Right. We would spend, if you want to go back to the moment in time when we were starting our business, right? Because at that point it was pre-AI, it was pre crypto, it was pre-cloud, it was kind of mid-2000s. So it was the first wave that we were right on was the social media explosion, right? Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. And everyone kept talking about what it would mean for business, and what it would mean for like all these themes in business, what it would mean for marketing, and what it would mean for sales, and what it would mean for engagement. Very few people were talking about what would individuals have to do in order to adapt and succeed and thrive in that environment. But individuals changing their behavior, stopping doing things one way and starting doing things another way, was the only thing that was going to tap any value out of it. And so everyone was really comfortable talking in these grand abstractions, and no one was comfortable talking about the individual human journey and how difficult and challenging and fragile people can be in that time. And so it was I think it kind of grew out of that dissatisfaction. And then it became very clear that if we could learn to pull those levers that would make behavior change happen, the businesses that could do that and the individuals that could do that were going to achieve significant results. It's like the one skill set that lets you use all the other skill sets.
Interesting. We need to dig into that. We're going to dig into that. But before my social media crew give me a bollocking for not asking this question early enough in the show, because then it makes them go on a bit of a where's Wally to try and find it. I'm very, very interested to find out from you anyway. I always ask this question of all of our guests, man, and you've heard. I believe that the 4 elements that go into high performance, success, connection, influence, and happiness, they all belong in an ecosystem where one cannot survive without the other. With your view of the world, I'm tremendously intrigued as to what your version of a high performance human is.
Yeah. So I'm going to say I think there's three things that go into making it up, because you always seem to need three things, and I love what you've done in having four. But I also want to preface this answer with, there is a world where we may want to spend the next hour talking about just this question, I reckon, because it's such a powerful question that I feel like you are. So I think the three things are, a high performance human is able to meet and exceed their goals.
Mm-hmm.
But crucially, they're able to do that in a way that maximizes their well-being, and in a way that leaves the world better than they found it. Because I reckon, and I think that third bit is really important and doesn't get talked about enough in that way. Because I think we need a definition of my concern with a lot of definitions of high performance is, in a past life, I was a world top 10 debater, right? So I used to like debate very, very competitively. And so my mind always goes to the question of, when I'm thinking, do I like this definition? I'm like, I always ask myself, is there anything that fits in my definition that I really don't want to fit in this definition? And my concern with a lot of definition of high performance is that like dictators fit in the definition of high performance, and like psychopaths fit in the definition of high performance. And I'm like, I don't want my definition to include those, because I don't think that is high performance. I think that's something else. And so I think this notion of leaving the world better than you found it is, for me, part of the high performance story, in a way that is slightly punchy than like a lot of people would put like a sense of purpose or a sense of connection. But I'm like, depends what your purpose is. I don't think all purposes are created equal. I just don't. Like if your purpose is take over a country and impoverish a set of people, I'm like, I don't think that's a good purpose. Regardless of how well you meet your goals. And so for me, those three things together, yes, you meet and exceed your goals, but you do it in a way that maximizes your well-being and you leave the world better than you found it. For me, that's what high performance human really means.
You're the first one that's really, you're the first one, and I could have seen this coming a mile off. You're the first one that has made that distinction, because you're absolutely right. You look at, or I think about any other or most other definitions that we've had on the show so far, you're absolutely spot on. They could describe one of the best humans on the planet, and they could describe one of the absolutely worst people on the planet, right? And when we've talked about high performance up to this point, it's always been devoid of that judgment as to whether something is good or bad. And in the topic of high performance, no one ever, including myself, really, no one ever really talks about the whole topic of good and bad, right and wrong, good and evil, whichever way you want to call it. My question off the back of that, though, is who are we to judge what's right and wrong? Like, because, yes, to the majority of people, a horrible dictator that would have caused atrocities all over the world and whatnot, would be seen as an absolute tyrant, so on and so forth. But the reason why I want to question this is because a very good, a person that I've been very, very close to, has come from a country that was sort of led by a dictator, and the Western world, saw that guy as an absolute arsehole, but she was talking about him as someone that, yes, ruled with an iron fist, but at least we weren't booted out and and killed out of our country as part of that society once that person had been eradicated from his position.
Yeah.
And so you got a question, right? As much as we want to be very altruistic and very sort of happy about, not happy, that's the wrong word, a very noble, should we say, in our pursuit of high performance, it doesn't take long to see it from a different perspective.
No,
So,
not at all.
so how would you tackle that? So, say for example, let's go, Nazi Germany, right? For example, right? It's the most obvious example, and for those people that suffered at the hands of the ideals and whatnot, absolutely, absolute devil, whatever, right? But for the people that were within that country, there was a reason why he got voted in the first place, right? There was a reason. Because there was enough people in Germany at the time that believed that he was the right guy for the job, right? And they believed in his version of high performance. So to them, how would you debate high performance in that regard against someone that is on the other side of the fence looking at it and going, he's actually, I actually do believe what he has to say? Because there's all sorts of dramas kicking up around nationalism right now.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my motherland, right? I'm looking back in England, and there are so many issues coming up as a result of people just not feeling heard, not feeling listened, and then someone's grabbed a hold of that and ran with it, and they're going, "Yep, that guy's legit. We're going to follow him." And as a result, nationalism is gaining more momentum than it almost ever has in recent history. So, how would you tackle those people that would debate that what your version of high performance is and what theirs is like polar opposite?
Yeah, great question. So a couple of ways I would approach that. So number one is I think in the overwhelming majority of circumstances I would avoid that particular debate because it's very likely to end it seems today with many good friends. But the second to approach it in two different ways. So one is I think basically everything you just said I would completely agree with, but I don't think that distinguishes between whether or not it's a part of high performance. So the fact that people can disagree about whether or not one thing is good or bad doesn't mean that it's not either good or bad. So the presence of disagreement is that there's always been disagreement. My argument is that disagreement should be in the conversation. And so the fact that it's hard to agree doesn't mean we should not talk about it. And the fact that it's like hard to assess whether, say, any one's definition of high performance is good or bad for the world, the fact that like, well, we might have like a 51-49 split doesn't mean it's not an important part of the conversation. Because and they always say that a conversation on the internet has gone south when Hitler gets introduced into the conversation on Reddit. But for the purposes of this, I think we're using it in the right way. My argument would be that a world that's so let's do this on a geopolitical level and then a business level. On a geopolitical level, a world that says, well, there's going to be a lot of disagreement about whether or not what's going on in country XYZ, including our own, for like the fact that there's going to be a lot of disagreement about whether or not this thing is good, means we should just not talk about that. That's a recipe for a world full of appeasement and a recipe of a world that just like turns away from the most important conversations. And if you put that in a business sense, look at the sustainability conversation. Companies seem to, in many ways, not be able to win at the moment in their response to social justice issues. You look at sustainability, right? We've just, in the last 2 weeks, we've just transgressed the 7th of 9 planetary boundaries. If we meet every single target from the Paris Accord, we're likely to have a world that warms most likely by 1.5 to 2 degrees. That's the very, very best case scenario, and it's not going to happen because we're not going to meet any of the targets from Paris. So we're in like this existential moment of climate crisis, and some companies get boycotted for being too green because quote unquote companies shouldn't weigh in on social issues. From my perspective, so people disagree about it. I'm like, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have it in the conversation. And I think the world is better when we do care about the qualitative nature of a purpose, not just the presence of a purpose. Because if you look at how a lot of people talk about this movement, they're like, first thing people need is a purpose. I'm like, no, the first thing people need is a purpose worth wanting. That's really different to we shouldn't just want high performance. We should want high performance that's worth wanting. And to me, that means you have to talk about the qualitative nature of the impact. And so that would be my first thing. But my second thing would be, there's a real distinction between judgment and judgmentalism. And I think we should steer away from judgmentalism, whereby we become overly critical of the person, in favor of judgment, where we can disconnect people from behavior and talk about behaviors and impact.
Yeah.
And so, like, in a work context, I think trying as best as possible to play the ball and not the person is really critical in preserving that.
I think what we've come across here is perhaps a fundamental concern that is preventing so many people from advancing, from achieving a level of high performance, from change, right? From having that ability to pull change levers within their lives, let alone businesses or what have you. It is the inability that society has right now to be able to see the fact that you've got to break a few eggs in order to make a cake, right? It's a complete lack of understanding that just because your opinion is being disagreed with by someone else doesn't invalidate yours or their opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, a very popular example that's doing the rounds on social media is the American Charlie Kirk, who's going into various American universities and talking about liberalism and whatnot, and he's very pro-Trump, which I think I think one of the reasons why he does rub people up the wrong way is because he can come across a little bit bandwagony. He wants to hitch his wagon to the Trump train and whatnot, but when he actually stops doing that and he starts actually getting into decent formal levels of debate, you can't deny the degree of validity that he's coming at certain things with, and vice versa. Now, you can have your opinions and you can be entitled to an opinion. This kind of goes in line with one of the first things that I wanted to talk about with you today, which is identity and the struggle for people to understand their own identity within a world that has got so much aversion to people having an identity, right? And it kind of ties in with this quite nicely, because in order for us to have some form of identity that is personal and pertinent and purposeful to us, we have to be prepared to be disagreed with. What is your thoughts on how, so as you've debated, and I think because you have almost been in debates as a sport, really, which is amazing. I think that is actually probably one of the best things that's probably set you up to be able to compartmentalize personal from opinion and whatnot, right? Because you've done it as a competition. But why do you think, what is it within people, and how do you think that people can help to grow past that concern of taking things too personally when someone disagrees with them? How do you sort of help people with that?
Yeah, great question. By the way, I'm sure a lot of your some of your listeners would know you from different parts of your work, but for those listeners who know you as an auctioneer, I had the great pleasure of seeing Andy run a charity auction at an event we were both at, and after watching you captivate a room of people, of like 180 people, the way you played the right tune in the right way at the right time to bring that entire set of people on board with you and deliver like this amazing result, I want to say you would have been an awesome debater, and you really should give it a whirl at some point. But to the question of like the disagreement thing, there's so much to this. So I think there's two sides to the coin. Because the art of disagreeing constructively, which is, I think, what we want, to be able to have two parties sit in the presence of deeply opposed views and maintain respect for each other as people and civility. And ultimately, at the pointiest end, to not have things reduced to violence, because once conversation breaks down, violence is the next step, which is why like we need to place such a high premium on the art of conversation. To disagree constructively, it really does take two people. And if you imagine a conversation where like, let's just say I'm feeling quite personally attacked because of the way someone else is putting their opinions across, it's one thing to say, I need to not take that personally, but the other person can make it much easier or much harder for me to take it personally by the way they're constructing their arguments. And so I think the one thing we need to be really careful of is we're putting a lot of, often when we say, man, conversations breaking down in society, people are taking a lot of things personally. We put the onus on the people who are, quote unquote, taking things personally to do a better job. I want to put a lot of burden on the people who are pissing those people off to argue better.
Yeah, completely agree.
Because it really does take two to tango. So I think the art of conversation, where we learn to constructively disagree, is critical. And there's great management training around this. We used to spend so much time as a management team helping people raise problems and issues in ways that are likely to get a constructive response from the person they're raising it with. So there is, for instance, I'll give you a really specific example that people can use. There is a framework for delivering feedback that could result in argument, right? It's called SBIBI. So a lot of the way that feedback gets delivered is a manager will say to a team member, they'll say, I can't believe you did X, Y, Z. That really sucked. That really sucked. Fix it or do something different, right? And that can trigger in the person receiving the feedback. Like so many things can be going on there, but often it works on the presumption that like either the person didn't know they'd done something wrong or the person didn't already feel like maybe they'd screwed up. The framework says that, so that's an example of like a red flag situation that is very likely to result in a lot of personal disagreement, people taking things personally. That person who got the feedback is likely to go home and say to their partner, oh man, my boss just bawled me out today for like doing X, Y, Z. They're like, the framework that you can use is called SBIBI, which is situation, behavior, impact, desired behavior, desired impact, right? So you can, so the way that would go is, hey, just need to have a word about something, situation. So today when this thing happened, the behavior, the thing I saw you do was this. And critically, the reason I'm giving you feedback is that the impact of that behavior was X, Y, Z, right? So this is not a conversation about you. This is a conversation about this very particular impact and this situation that behavior was in. What I would have loved is if in that same situation, the behavior you could have exhibited was this, because I think that would have had this impact. What do you think about those things? And now we're having a conversation about behavior and its impact, not about me as an individual. There is me as a person warranting maximum respect, nothing but love and kindness. And then there's my behavior, which in my view is just fair game to be talked about, conversed about. And so like by shifting that like that, we can try to get conversations away from people and onto behavior. And that can be a big difference, which is really hard to do in 120 characters, which is why Twitter is shit for human behavior.
Absolutely. And you can very much, and that simple sort of explanation of behavior versus person by explaining it in that SBIBI, situation, behavior, impact, it turns the behavior into a thing, not a form of identity, right?
Exactly.
And you can apply that to anything, right? You can apply that to relationships. Like I'm listening to you here and I'm thinking, shit, I've reacted to things at times and whereby I've thought that someone who has seen something that I've done as a bad thing is been a slight on my personality, right? Well, it's not. It's just in that instant, the actions that were taken have created this level of impact, which is not what your intentions were. And so your intentions as a human can be all well and good, but intention and impact, if they don't align, then that is on the deliverer, not the receiver of whatever the behavior was, right?
100%. 100%. Because that is bang on, right? Because imagine flipping the model, right? That's why the model works. Because now imagine that the feedback is actually this to your boss. Hey, yesterday during that meeting, your behavior of bawling me out in front of everyone because of that thing you thought I'd done had this really specific impact on me. What I really would have loved you to do in that situation is maybe not do that in the meeting, but if you could maybe have a quiet word with me afterwards and maybe even use this framework when it's coming the other way as well. Because like the model works both
It works
ways.
both ways. And if you then throw in a dollop of gratitude on and layer that on top, so as the employee going back to the employer, you turn around and say, you know what, I'll take it on the chin that behavior was out of line, and I understand why the impact was detrimental towards the organization. If I do exert any other behaviors that do have negative impacts, it would be even more appreciated if you could bring this to my attention in a private setting. That way, my reaction to it will be one of constructive as opposed to defensive, which is, I'm sure, a better way for you that you'd want it to be received.
Yeah, bang,
Um,
100%.
Man, you throw in a dollop of gratitude on that, and all of a sudden the world starts getting better quite quickly.
Yeah, which can be really hard, right? I mean, I found we built for me, I love that you brought the kind of gratitude and feedback thing up, right? Because from a behavior change perspective, there's no more powerful tool for changing behavior than feedback, right? And you can quantify that as a guy called John Hattie, who's a New Zealand professor who now runs the School of Education at Melbourne University, who was chair of the Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership. And he ran the largest ever study meta-analysis of what drives educational outcomes for students. And he found that the single largest, it wasn't class size, it wasn't teacher training, wasn't teacher pay. The single biggest predictive factor in whether or not students achieved high performance was getting personal, individualized feedback as close as possible to the moment when they needed it. It is the most powerful driver of behavior, is feedback. And sometimes that can be really material, like, hey, Andy, I've got some feedback for you. Or it can be environmental feedback. If you think about like the classic example everyone uses of like, well, if the kids stick their hand in the fire, they'll never do it again. It's because of the feedback. It's environmental feedback, right?
Yep.
But the challenge with feedback is everyone has learned that they're meant to like it, but it still often feels really shit. And so everyone knows that you're meant to, like, so we built a company that did teacher feedback, right? It was called Educator Impact. We built a tool that would go into schools and help teachers get 360-degree feedback. And so we spent years trying to build feedback cultures inside education institutions. And what's funny is you ask at the start of a session who in the room appreciates or likes the value of feedback, and every hand goes up, right? Because everyone knows they're meant to say they like feedback.
Yeah.
But imagine that you get in at the end of the day and your partner says, honey, I've got some feedback for you. Like,
It's like that's not the sexiest chat ever, darling.
no. So it's like, this is going to be not the evening I had in my head. So it's the hardest thing about it is that it feels hard, right? Like it's hard work all the time to embrace it. And the SBIBI thing sounds amazing in theory, but then in the rough and tumble of a daily workplace, it takes an enormous amount of presence of mind for people to do what you just said, right? Which is understand that their intent and impact is often deeply misaligned. And that like deliberate effort needs to go into try to align those things and creating an environment and a culture where those sorts of conversations are permissible.
It coincides with a conversation that I had with a guy that we talked about before we hit record, Scott Bateman, and if you do listen to this, Scott, please notice that it was an entirely positive conversation, by the way.
Wow.
Ish. And what we talked about in our conversation on the show a while ago now was humans a human's inability to receive, right? And we were talking about it in that sort of context as as compliments, as good stuff, right? People are great to give out, positivity and well dones and pats on the bum and all the rest of it, but they really struggle to receive it. And the human's inability to receive feedback, and we was using it purely in a positive context, but you can apply it to both here, is an inherent issue in society, right? The inability to receive in the way in which it is being delivered is really, really challenging. That's the tricky bit that causes so many flare-ups in your relationships, in your work, in your sport, in your wherever you are, where you are collaborating or having some sort of interaction or exchange of ideas or whatever with other people. This conversation could go in a couple of different ways. I've got about 4 different directions that this could go in now, mate, by the way.
Sorry about that.
No, mate, I love it. I absolutely love it. I want to park that for a second, and when we're talking about disagreement, I want to talk about the other word that you said then a little while ago, which was disagreement or living a life of appeasement. Now, interestingly, only a couple of days ago, I wrote an article that's going to come out in an industry magazine about and question whether nice guys finish last or not. And I spent most of my life thinking, with the chip on my shoulder, because I saw myself as a nice guy and constantly felt that I was at the wrong end of the stick. Or, at school, it was always Andy is such a good friend from members of the opposite sex, which was the story of my life at that stage. And what I've really come to realize is that appeasement leads to it contributes towards this whole topic of identity, because if you live to appease, you end up foregoing your own identity in order to forsake other people's identities, right? And I think that you could align this to the popularity around the conversation of humility. Talk to us about your take on society's sort of growing opinion around humility, the popularist view that's coming through, and how you feel that is impacted society in a positive way and in a not so positive way. Because I fear that the way that it's being portrayed is being very much a case. It's almost like a one or the other. You're either humble or you're not. You're either living a life of humility or you don't. And I think that dichotomy has created a greater divide in society with respect to who people are as individuals.
Yeah, man, that's another giant there's so much in that. So a couple of different things on that. Firstly, just to call out the appeasement thing and the being friend boxed for a whole bunch of time. I think one thing that's probably worth just calling out is that I think the quote unquote nice guy movement that has a lot of baggage associated with it now as well, because there is this kind of, I don't know if you're spend as much time in different weird online transgressive circles as I spend, but there's this weird attachment of like this kind of nice guy incel kind of weird it's kind of like almost intersection of that with this very strangely kind of internet misogyny movement that's just frankly weird and pretty. And I know so I definitely want to distance myself from that in the conversation.
The whole toxic masculinity thing.
Yeah, it's just pretty gross. But very much what I know you're driving at with that question around the humility piece. I think so when well, to say it in declaration, I think humility is one of the probably top 3 or 4 most important qualities to cultivate if you want to be able to do change and do high performance. But there's a lot of subtleties to humility where people think it means things that it doesn't mean. So humility is completely detached and irrelevant from a sense of confidence, right? Like just completely detached. It's completely detached from the concepts that I know you were just drawing the distinction between of like austerity, that somehow like it's this weird kind of Judeo-Christian kind of Middle Ages monk approach to humility, like a humble life in nothing but a frock and bare feet and like a vow of silence at some sort of Franciscan monastery on a mountain in Italy or something. Completely detached from that. I think the way in which I think humility is important is there's a brilliant saying, and I spoke about this, I know, a bit at the conference we were at, and I won't relitigate the full story now because it'll take too long. But there's a beautiful line from a guy called Devi Shetty, who's a heart surgeon in India, who pioneered this amazing approach to open heart surgery at the Narayana Hridayalaya Clinic. It's this world-leading approach to heart surgery. It is cheaper, more effective, higher throughput, better return on capital for the hospital. These are all like proper figures that have been studied. And he was asked why, if your methodology for heart surgery is so good, why aren't all these cost-conscious Western hospitals copying what you do? And his response was basically, good luck getting senior leaders at Western hospitals to copy something from poor old India. They're not interested in it. And his line was, where there is ego, there is excess. And I think that is such a beautiful articulation of why change can be hard. Not arrogance, right? This is not about arrogance. It's about ego and sense of self, right? And to put it very simply, for me to step into a better version of myself tomorrow, right? Whatever that looks like for you, a better auctioneer, a better real estate agent, a better salesperson, a better manager, a better husband, a better wife. For me to step into a better version of myself tomorrow requires me to admit that me today is imperfect, right? That I don't know everything, that I don't know, that I'm not perfect, that I haven't got it all figured out, that I'm kind of just making it up as I go. Like it requires at least a tacit admission of that. Otherwise, there is no reason to ever change.
Yes.
So the whole foundation of improvement and high performance is at least enough humility to recognize my own imperfections and the ability and capacity to improve. And this is why, by the way, one of the things that makes it so hard to get better is already being good, right? Like it's Gary Kasparov said this, 9 times world chess grandmaster. And he said the hardest tournament he ever won was the third tournament. He said the first one was easy because everyone, like, no one knew who I was. The second one was easy because everyone thought the first one was a fluke. The third one was hard because the whole tournament had learned his strategies. And he said, I had to unlearn everything that had won me the first 2 tournaments. And his words were, the hardest part of winning the third tournament was escaping the gravity of my own success, right? The confirmation bias that comes with having already knocked it out of the park, already being award winning, already being at the top of my sales figures, already like that greatness is the biggest enemy of the next step, because it breeds an ego, an identity that is attached to that success. And so humility, I think, is the ability to detach yourself from the ego and identity that is built up around your own successes, and to be able to have the humility to step from that into a better version of yourself. Which is slightly different from the "don't be an arrogant little shit" thing, which is also good advice, but different.
So it's an interesting little rabbit hole, this, because what flirted along my mind then, as you were talking about how we need to, in order for us to be able to progress and change and whatnot, we need to have an ability to detach ourselves from the ego part of our identity and whatnot, or the part of our identity that has generated the level of success that we have achieved to date. Could you argue that we almost have to create a bit of a construct in our minds where we almost have two identities within us, in the sense of, because in order for us to change, we need to be able to let go of the identity that's generated our success up to this point. At the same time, we need to still own, because we are still living in that moment of success, and we still need to own that part of our identity in order to fulfill that level of success to the fullest of its capacity. So could you argue that we need to start thinking about identity as a two-part concept, where there is our next identity is just a couple of steps in front of us, and we need to make sure that we keep up with the next part, with our second identity, whilst making sure that we make the most of the identity that we are currently existing in right now?
I mean, I think that absolutely works as a way of thinking about it. 100% works as a way of thinking about it. I would probably arrive at a very similar place slightly differently, which is, I wouldn't view it as stepping from today's identity into a different one tomorrow. I'd view it as an evolution of today's into a different thing. Because when I say detach, I don't mean so much leave it behind and move into something else. I mean, stop trying to protect it. Right. So by being attached, I think what I mean is it's trying to protect this, right? Which can happen in a lot of ways. So arrogance is trying to protect this, right? It's me going, yeah, this is awesome. I'm great. It's so good. It's me trying to protect my identity by putting up a fence of like braggadocio around it, of being like, look how much better I am than everyone else, which is really someone just trying to talk themselves into liking their own identity, really. It's a protective measure that we should have a tremendous amount of sympathy for, even though that can be hard when faced with just shitty levels of behavior.
Yeah, with an arsehole, yeah.
So that's one thing. So the arrogant attachment to today's identity can be one thing that stops us. We don't bother changing because I'm so good today. But the other one is fear, right? So that is I don't want to step into a better version of myself tomorrow, or try to, because I might fail. And if I fail, this identity evolves from one that I can be really proud of into one that's now all about how I've failed. So one is kind of protecting it through, I guess, talking it up, and the other one is protecting it by being too scared to try something for fear of failure and what that might mean for. And so you have to, I think, grapple with your relationship to failure. And I know Renee had that beautiful example. If people haven't listened to Renee's podcast, they definitely need to go back and listen to that episode, because she talked about Failure Fridays, which is such a beautiful example from her. I don't know Renee, by the way. I just loved her on that episode. And I think that's what I interpret that as doing, and the reason I think that sort of stuff works well is it's trying to acculturate people to being comfortable with failure, right? It's just trying to make it normal. that this is a thing we talk about. It's not something we're scared of, and that helps with humility, right? Because it means it's another thing we can be honest about. Because I would say that humility I would put fourth in my list. I'd actually put the ability to tell the truth above humility. But so I think your description perfectly preserves those two things. But I think it's useful to think about it as like it's one identity that evolves and shifts and changes rather than us leaving this one and taking that one, if you know what I mean.
And as you've been talking out, I've been scribbling down a little picture where you can, instead of seeing it as two separate identities, because I agree with you, it's an evolution of our own identity. You can almost then describe it more so as two parts to your identity. There is your core DNA, part of your identity that is forever you, but then there is another section of your identity that surrounds that core that you could almost call it either behavioral identity or identity behaviors that then are the ones that are the variable part of your identity. So you've got your fixed part of your identity and then that variable part. And it would take, in order to really alter one of the core identities or beliefs, it would be like and you could almost argue this is one of the reasons why humans have a massive problem generally with changing something inherently within themselves unless they hit a life-altering situation, right? Yeah. It's always one of those ones where and I'm case in point, like my old man passing away, for example. It took him for me to understand the concept of satisfaction in life, right? And it's one of those ones where it's a shame that we as humans have to get smashed into a brick wall in order for us to change one of those core pieces of our identity, right? Whereas if we were to be able to understand, and it sort of ties in with the SBIBI, right? Because we talk about trying not to take it personally versus whatever, you could almost say that, right, well, you've got your core identity. That your core identity is who you are, what you're about, and your human values. All of those other parts of your identity are affected through circumstance, through your own behaviors, through the behaviors of others, and so on and so forth. But if we can learn to be able to understand it in that respect, so therefore we can control that sort of outer layer of our identity to a greater degree, we're going to have a much better chance of being able to evolve it to be able to, one, make sure that we don't lose track of our own identity at its core. So it's not a case of you having to and it's kind of where my mistake with the whole first identity, second identities, that's probably where the mistake could be made, is that we need to have to change who we are inherently as human beings, right? Behavioral the behavioral variables of our identity is where I think we need to do a lot more work on, and actually making sure that we make that distinction, because I think that's where society is really struggling, is they struggle to make that differentiation between
100%.
Yeah.
And everything. So I adore that distinction, right? Because I reckon there's then even more layers on the outside, right? There's bits of behavior that have got jack all to do with identity, right? And there's and I do think one of the I don't want to weigh into the identity politics conversation because that really is a different podcast, but briefly to go there, I think it is problematic that I personally think it's problematic that everything is becoming somehow a question of identity now. And it just doesn't, it makes everything, it's like the hardest version of the conversation, to make every little conversation interaction somehow taken into a much bigger conversation about these really core, important, critical, foundational issues of identity. Sometimes improvement just isn't, sometimes it's just performance is about just getting better at some stuff. It's not about it's not about fundamentally changing who you are. Sometimes it is, like you say, and I think the bigger the moment, the bigger the thing, the more likely it is to intersect with a kind of a fundamental question. But also the truth is there's 1,000, so I'm not a psychologist, and there's not going to be a but after that. I'm not a psychologist, and therefore I'm not going to try to weigh into like the thousands of different, very well evidenced theoretical psychological models they are to kind of understand and theorize the human sense of identity. There's a few books on my shelf about it behind me at the moment, just because I love this stuff so much. But the there are definitely multiple ways of thinking about it. I think the bit that's important when the rubber meets the road is for people to develop an awareness of where their goals intersect with questions that are identity based, right? So I'll give you a really clear personal example. When I was starting out, I do lots of keynote speaking and stuff like that. It's always kind of been something I've done on the side because frankly, they've been running companies has taken up much more of my time. And so I'm getting to do a lot more of it now, which is great. But when I was first starting out, right, I was coming out of an extremely academic, quite cynical, quite self-obsessed crowd where if something wasn't peer reviewed and published in Nature, it kind of wasn't worth talking about. And to like be quote unquote just a speaker and stand up on stage and like just talk about stuff, and some of it might not have come from this, some of it might have been personal experience, and some of it might have been anecdotes I've come across. I had it genuinely when I was first starting, I had a thing of, but that's all bullshit. Like that's not me. I'm going to be on an academic fast track. I'm going to be whatever. And it was genuinely, I had to like do some work on myself because I could see that quite core belief was both untrue and unhelpful. There's enormous amounts of value in the work that people in this sort of space do. And I wanted some of the benefits of it. I wanted to be able to earn money from speaking. I wanted to be able to earn money from the thought leadership thing. So there was both like an intellectual reason that it was unhelpful and a commercial reason that it was unhelpful. But it like took some work. And it also, if I'm going to be completely honest, I mean, I had to start spending slightly less time with that kind of quite closed off and cynical crowd, and a little bit more time with people who weren't like that, so that really would have stood in the way of me achieving the things I wanted to achieve. And it really was a bit of just a kind of a very personal dom thing. The pointiest end of the triangle is going on that journey whilst not hating yourself for it, right? Which is the well-being thing, is that like there's nothing, as Cole James once said, or at least I heard him say, he might have taken it from somewhere else. There is nothing in the world as mean as the things that people say to themselves about themselves when they're by themselves. Like that is, people are at their very, 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 very worst when they're talking to themselves about themselves. And a hell of a lot of our protective behaviors around arrogance comes from there. Right? It's people protecting themselves from themselves. And going on that journey, like that's a bit of an identity thing as well, because working on a little bit of self-love, which is not treat yourself taking Fridays off to get ice cream. That's not self-love. That's fucking about. But like really that kind of working on how you talk to yourself thing is a really critical part of that. Anyway, sorry, that became like a self-therapy session. That was not my intent.
But I think you've sort of helped to bring it full circle a little bit, in the sense of you could an FYI, you could talk about going out for ice cream on a Friday. It's almost like a self-appeasement, right?
People should do it. It's just because we should place a very high premium on enjoying ourselves. They just shouldn't call it self-care. They should go, exactly. I want an ice cream.
Yeah, exactly. Just call it what it is, man. You want a burger, have a burger. It's okay. It's almost like we have become so obsessed with those behavioral variables within our identity. Again, we don't want to get too political, right? But when people have been talking about identity in modern society, it has been overtaken by the surface level narrative, right? So, and in some instances, it's a very surface level, physical surface level narrative, right? In terms of how identity is represented for them. But I think that the world, and it's almost like there's always this constant opposing of forces with respect to acceptance of people's identity and so on and so forth. But I think the argument that needs to be had, it's not what you are, it's why you are, right? Which is the core bit. Okay. And so if someone wants to, if they decide that they want to take on a different gender or a different religion or a different this or a different that, a different other, the different bit is the what part. That is the what representation of why you are who you are, right? But if you can get to that core fundamental and be able to, and more importantly, be able to articulate that bit, people are going to have a way better chance of being able to understand why you are going down the track that you are going down. Because speaking to those core fundamental DNA sort of belief system, and this is where it comes real full circle to why high performance and the good and bad of high performance, right? Because as a core fundamental, those tyrants, those dictators and whatnot, their core fundamental beliefs or value or why they do what they do, they will be the same at a core level. It's just how that manifests and what that ends up becoming, and then brings it back to your point around behavior and impact, right? So it's how that is represented in behaviors, which then creates the level of impact, whether it's good or bad. So the motivation, the theory, the drive part is something that I think if everybody understood what those whys were, we'd be able to understand the how and the what a lot better, which would then allow us not to reason with some of the bad things people do. You would not want to do, you don't want to feel that you can reason with the atrocities that some of these people have created, right? Well, it's like comedians, like a comedian, Sean Locke said, well, I can see the good side and the bad.
Yeah, there's good people on both sides.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be that, because then you fall into the appeasement category anyway. But at least you can understand the mechanics of it without being able to accept it.
Well, and I think I want to be very, I don't want to be careful how I say this. I just want to be deliberate with how I say this. When I hear about, like atrocities, thankfully I haven't lived through something that feels like a global atrocity. But I have this tremendously strong emotional reaction, right? Which is like so much sadness and hurt and vicarious pain for the people who are affected, and this deep hatred and anger at the people who are perpetrating, right? That's how I feel when I hear about those things. What I think I should feel is all those things for the victims, then deep hatred and anger at the act, and then love and compassion for the people who are perpetrating them. Right? That's what I think I should theoretically feel. I feel like the reason I can't is because I just can't. But my argument would be that if we really want to like break cycles, we have to be able to separate people, and I mean all people from behavior. Now we might treat the person based on their behavior for a whole bunch of reasons. We might still imprison that person or assassinate that person if it's a time of war, or like I'm not lobbying for those things, but I'm not suggesting that we don't do anything. But in terms of how we theorize how we feel, there's a fascinating passage in one of the books that's behind me about Anders Breivik, there was the Norwegian mass killer who took a rifle into
I remember. Yeah,
and they were contrasting passages from the trial of Anders Breivik with passages from trials of American mass murderers, and they were completely different. The Norwegian culture was very much to, well, this person needs to be imprisoned and locked up because they're a threat and a menace to society, and we need to remove that threat and menace. But we don't need to torture them. We don't need to keep them in inhumane conditions because that's our behavior. That's that.
Mm.
I don't believe in that. I'm not as bad as this person. I'm not going to do those things. We're going to treat them humanely. We're going to make sure that they're going to live out the rest of their lives in imprisonment, but we're not going to, like, we're actually going to give a shit about the conditions they live in, stuff like that. And so somewhere in here, I think there is if we really want to be serious about a world that's better, we do need to, it's really easy to do all this stuff when the situation's good. Like, leadership's always easy when times are good.
Mhm.
Sales are always easy when there's more buyers than you can possibly service and everyone wants your product. And you say, like, when things are easy, none of this shit matters because things are easy. It only matters when it's hard. And I think it's the same in those kind of identity act conversations.
Yeah, and you could tie it back to theological discussions, couldn't you, with respect to forgiveness? If you're to go down a Christian path, Jesus always bangs on about forgiveness, right? Right? And he was on the cross and forgave the Romans for what they were doing and to him at the time and what have you. Interestingly, though, it just sort of sparked a little sort of contradiction in my head where part of the Bible talks about eye for an eye and all that sort of stuff as well. A little bit of a contradiction there.
But that's it. So I'm not religious at all, but I did grow up educated by the Jesuits, and so definitely had my good Christian upbringing. But I think the most useful statement in the Christian canon is hate the sinner, not the sinner. I think that's a really I think that statement maps onto contemporary understandings of psychology. And you can start doing that stuff at a really deep level. There's a fair question that is, we definitely don't need to go into today, as to how much anyone really chooses their behaviors in the sense that we mean choose. There are deep conversations to be had about conceptions of libertarian free will. But like I said, I don't think you need any of them. I think the advice to live by is simply to, as best as possible, not turn things that really need not be identity questions into identity questions if they don't need to be.
Yeah, and I think the word identity has just been abused like there's no tomorrow, and it coincides with a whole bunch of misconceptions around certain words and the meaning of those words and the concept behind those words as well. Very, very interesting. I could talk to you for donkeys, man. I really, really could. You are an absolute gentleman, a scholar. I'm so glad that you took the skeptical chip off your shoulder as an intellect and joined the rest of us normal human beings, because we are very much benefiting from your presence, my man. We really, really are. I only hope that this is the start of a really cool, fruitful connection and friendship moving forward, because
Absolutely.
you are a man that I have so much respect and admiration for. It's not even funny. Now, before we let you go, though, one last question. Now, because you've recently gone through a bit of a decision around your career, and you're going one out. You're going one out and doing your own thing. Now, in that, obviously, because work and everything, what we do sort of goes towards forming part of our behavioral identity and whatnot. And you will be looking for your own version of high performance right now, and it'll probably be a bit different from what you've experienced previously. So the final question that we always ask is, in your own pursuit, what is the one thing that's top of the list right now in terms of what you want to work on, improve, get better at, or obtain?
Yeah, I appreciate you sending that one through in advance, because I really did genuinely have to think about that, and it was extraordinarily useful just for me personally. So thank you for sending that through. So as you just alluded to there, I recently left EY, who had acquired one of my companies, and the other company we'd built also got sold last year, and so suddenly find myself for the first time in 17 years unemployed, which is so if you know anyone who's looking for staff, no. But so for me, without a shadow of a doubt, the thing I need to work on is the discipline around making clear choices for how I prioritize.
Right.
So I'm working on 2 book ideas. That really needs to become 1. I've got a bunch of creative pursuits that I'm interested in working on, and some of them are in music and some of them are in digital design, and those really need to become 1 thing.
Mhm.
And then I'm really trying to choose between, from a speaking perspective, exactly what the kind of next area is. And at the moment, there's 4 on the list. That really needs to become 1.
Mm.
And the truth is, as I reflect on it, Pete Feuder once said, strategy is saying no to things.
Mm.
And I just need to at least give myself a timeline for saying no to things.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I'm gonna do a little bit of a whole lot, when really I should do a whole lot of a little bit.
It's easier said than done, that, mate.
Well,
When your eyes are bigger than your belly, mate, it's very, it's, in fact, ironically, I've been saying something very, very similar. As soon as I finished writing the book, I hit the full stop on the final edit, burst into tears at 2:30 in the morning. I was like, fuck this for a bunch of bananas. I am not doing anything else for a little while now. I'm just focusing on making the most out of this thing because it's almost done me in. So I can completely empathize with your thoughts around that. Look, Dom Thurbon, thank you. I can't thank you enough, man. You're an absolute joy to be connected to and to converse with. Your better half is joining me in a few episodes time, which is going to be exciting.
Yeah.
I've got no doubt that she will absolutely wipe the floor with me from an intellectual point of view, but do it in the nicest way possible because she's such a lovely human being in her own right. So I can't wait for that. But Dom, it would be a joy to have you back on at some stage.
Oh, mate, absolutely. And can I just say, this podcast is obviously now, I had not known about it before I met you, but it's now followed in my feed. It's going to be one of my new regular listens. I love the set of people you've had on. And congratulations. It's such a good show. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's a real pleasure.
Very, very good. I'm going to re-listen to this like this afternoon. Team, thank you so much for joining us. I know that we got into some fairly deep topics there, and we sort of scratched the surface of a couple of things that may have instigated a couple of thoughts in you. Please feel free, if you disagree or if you want to sort of dig into anything a little bit further, feel free to reach out to us. Obviously, I'm going to put all of Dom's links into the show notes, and you have to follow him because he is a guy that sees things in a slightly different way, but in a way that the world needs to see. World needs to see more of. So please follow him. He's an absolute gem of a human. So, team, on behalf of Dom and myself, stay safe, healthy, happy. Look after yourselves, each other. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care, team.